One of the things we see that's a real success in working with youth offenders is youth offenders pay restitution, and they pay it a lot more than adult offenders do.
A victim assistance advocate works closely with victims of justice-involved youth, providing an advocate that connects victims with services and helps them to understand the legal process and updates on their case. Why is it important for victims to have a person to connect with during the legal process?
So the criminal justice system is really confusing. And even a criminal justice process from county to county in the same state can be different. So somebody might have been a crime victim in Roseburg and they come to Jackson County and we have a different vernacular. We have different language. We call our hearings different things. We proceed through the process in a different way. The process is different depending on whether it's a juvenile, an adult, a felony, a misdemeanor. There's so many variables involved in the criminal justice process, and it has its own language and it has its own speed. And there's no way for the average community member to really understand that and what's going to happen. And so the role of the advocate is to educate those people through the process and help them understand the intricacies of their particular case. And it's really important for them to have an advocate, because if they don't, sometimes their voice doesn't get heard, their questions don't get answered, they don't understand why things happened the way they happened. They can become very frustrated. They can give up and not participate in the criminal justice process. So when they have an advocate, we make sure that we hope to make sure that it's a meaningful experience for people and that they understand the entire process and what's going on.
How have you partnered with Resolve to create a successful restorative process for victims?
In youth offender cases, we do restorative justice, which means the victim has a voice in what happens to that youth. And so we're always working with Resolve to make sure that any victim who wants to meet with a youth offender has the opportunity to do that. Any victim that wants to talk to a youth offender about their consequences, restitution. They may want to talk to the youth offender about where they're going to go from here. Sometimes victims have creative ideas about what the punishment should be, and Resolve can facilitate those ideas, where the victim advocate who works in the system, we just explain the system and we don't really get involved in that conversation and maybe some creative resolution, but Resolve can do that. So we want to make sure that we hook all our victims up with them so that they have an opportunity to look at a creative resolution for youth that maybe the regular criminal justice system isn't going to afford them that opportunity. And so that's really where our connection with Resolve comes in. And so we have a very close connection to make sure we're representing what they do accurately, and we're giving them victim information so that every victim has an opportunity to participate.
What is different about the process for juvenile cases and adult cases?
In the adult criminal court, adults get adjudicated, so they go through the court process, and when it's all done, they get put on probation, perhaps. Youth offenders are immediately connected with a probation officer. It's the first thing that happens, not the last thing that happens. So that juvenile probation officer immediately meets with that youth, and the youth can walk right in and say, yeah, I did it. What do we need to do to make this right? And probation, the people here at juvenile probation, are going to work with that youth to talk about what's your punishment going to be? What's the resolution going to be? What can we do differently? Can we get you to resolve? How do we invite the victim into this conversation? In the adult criminal justice system, it's set up so that the first thing we ask the defendant to do is say, I didn't do it, right? So it's all set up for the defendant to protect themselves and their rights. The juvenile system is set up for the youth to come in initially, meet with somebody who's working with the youth, to be friends with the youth, to help the youth. So the juvenile system is on the side of that youth offender. The adult system is punitive. So it's a different theory, if you will. That makes it very different for victims. Victims, as well as the system, are more focused in juvenile to improving the outcome for the youth. And in adult system, I think we don't have that kind of hope we have for kids. And so we're working towards punitive results instead of hope for the future for that adult.
How do you define success when working with victims?
We want victims to feel heard. That's the big thing, that they feel heard. They don't always get what they want. They frequently don't get what they want. But we want them to feel like they had a voice in the process. And not just that they said something, but that the court, the attorneys, the juvenile probation officers, the advocates, that people heard their concern. We really want that. One of the things we see that's a real success in working with youth offenders is youth offenders pay restitution, and they pay it a lot more than adult offenders do. So that's one of the outcomes we're looking for with youth offenders, for our victims to get restitution paid back to them. And sometimes in those resolve meetings, the victim will talk to the kid about, I don't want restitution from you. I want you to buff out my car. I don't want restitution from you. I want you to make it right in another way. And so there's more creative ways to get that restitution to help the victim feel whole and heard at the end of the process.